What has been your worst experience flying in a plane? Turbulence so bad, just before landing in LGA, that the flight attendants screamed in horror. They do this for a living. So naturally, I shat my pants. Child screaming her lungs out in the seat behind us for the last 40 minutes of a 10-hour flight. Because she didn't want to put her seatbelt on for the descent, and her useless father telling her, "Stop screaming," 100 times, then arguing with the flight attendants by saying, "Look at her. She doesn't want to put the seatbelt on. There's nothing I can do." The saving grace was one very sassy male flight attendant who would walk by every 2 minutes and just say, "Be the parent," to the father, and then continue walking. It was hilarious. Getting food poisoning 6 minutes before landing and experiencing the landing on the toilet. 12-plus-hour flight. Middle aisle on a 747. The seat recliner was broken. The guy next to me took his shoes off and his feet stank. The woman to my left spilled orange juice on me. And the headphone plug for the in-flight entertainment was broken. I did get extra potato chips as a compensation for the seat problem, though. Winking face. I was on a small commuter plane. Think about 20 seats. Single file the length of the cabin. And we hit a wind rotor. I think that's what it's called. Off the mountains. It felt like a giant baby grabbed the plane and shook it like a rattle. Hands down the worst turbulence I've ever felt. Other than that, my trips have been rather uneventful. I had a lot of ear problems as a kid that required multiple surgeries. I figured out on my first flight at age 19 that my ears could still bother me when the worst ear pain of my life hit me during the descent. Since then I figured out how to make them pop, making it less of an issue. But I was unprepared that first time and spent quite a bit of time holding back tears until my ears popped on their own a few minutes after landing. Not my story, but one from my father. He was flying in Russia and there was a terrible storm during the flight, and obvious it caused extreme turbulence. Then the captain turned on the PA system and told everyone, "This is Captain Bezhmertny speaking. We are passing through some light turbulence, so please fasten your seatbelts," in the most monotonous voice possible. Just to note, the name Bezhmertny translates in Russian to undying. Also, a lightning strike hit the wing, which was pretty scary. This will pale in comparison to others. But I was seated between two morbidly obese people on a fully booked flight once, and I have claustrophobia issues. I'm pretty broad-shouldered, so I was literally wedged in. It was a 2-hour flight of me silently freaking out and being the most uncomfortable I've ever been. We were flying from Florida to London when one of the engines caught fire somewhere out over the Atlantic, so had to turn back and land at New York. The engine on the replacement plane also caught fire, so the pilot had to turn back and land at New York. We didn't chance it with a third plane and went with a different carrier. I was 8 years old at the time, and for some strange reason, I'd never had a nightmare before then. My first nightmare was on the third plane back, and involved a Mickey Mouse in a glass coffin and an emaciated green version of Thing from the Addams Family. We were flying on a night flight from Germany to New York, and the flight couldn't have gone any better. We were descending into JFK. Nighttime. And the back wheels touch ground. Then the nose, and everyone started clapping. Then 2.2 seconds you just hear the engines go full throttle, and we took right off. You can see the terror and panic in people's faces. I was with my cousin who suffers from panic attacks as is. So this triggered it instantly. The flight attendants didn't seem to have any idea either. I immediately thought it was being hijacked. We flew around in circles for 10 minutes before the pilot came on the PA and pretty much said, "Our apologies about that. We were landing on a takeoff runway." I think about what could have happened very often as I fly pretty frequently. My first flight ever. Immediately after landing, a woman who was clearly intoxicated screaming about how she needed to get her dog off the storage. Under the plan, she started pushing people out of the way and engaged in a physical altercation with another flyer. Needless to say, she was arrested. As if the 3-hour flight wasn't enough time on the plane. We had to wait for all this to go down prior to exiting. Flying solo. Got seated next to someone with horrendous bow. Longest 4 hours of my life. Flying home to Australia. There's some European family whose daytime is apparently our nighttime. Bored kids run endless up and down the aisles, making sleep impossible. Cabin staff were useless. While in transit, a kid produces a green laser and waves it around. Unsure if it was powerful enough to blind. But idiot parents don't tell him off. I just walked away. Had enough bullshit. Thankfully their connecting flight was not the same. Slept for maybe 2 hours before arriving to attend my mother's funeral. Paid extra to have an emergency row seat on a 7-hour flight to London once. I got to my seat and there was a life raft attached to the door that took up all of my knee space. It was worse than having a regular seat and I had been charged extra for it. Needless to say, I did not enjoy my flight. I was able to complain about it later and get the upgrade refunded. The experience still sucked. I unknowingly had a sinus infection when flying from Greece to Italy. Thought I just felt terrible from a hangover. About 20 minutes into the flight my eardrum starts bursting and leaking fluid. It was some of the worst pain I've ever felt. The pressure subsided a bit once we landed in Rome, but I had almost 100% hearing loss in that ear. Until the swelling went down 4 days later. I chug Sudafed like crazy now if I feel any sort of congestion prior to flying. About 6 years ago I was sitting on the plane and I suddenly felt a tickle in my throat. It just wouldn't go away. I'd cough and cough and cough. Nothing. The only thing that helped was ice chips. But even then I couldn't stop, it was miserable. That night I woke up in the middle of the night with 2 swollen eyes. Swollen lips. Hives all over my body. Hot joints. And a tight chest. I was having some severe allergic reaction to something. Which means that on the plane, my throat was closing and I just didn't know. Of course the ice chips helped because they were keeping the swelling down. What's weird is that has never happened before or since then, and I'm not allergic to anything that I know of. I was seated next to a woman with an emotional support animal. If I had to guess, it was a pug chihuahua mix. Whatever it was small enough for her to keep on her lap. Apparently, the dog needed its own emotionally support animal because it was a wreck. It kept standing up, whining, and the mofo shit on her lap and would leak piss anytime someone walked by. The smell nauseated face. 20,000 feet, the O2 masks come down. Long silence from the crew. Finally, the pilot comes on and says lots of electrical systems are out and we're landing at a small airport. In 9 minutes, the descent was on full air brakes, which made the flight loud and shaking, with kids screaming because their ears were hurting. Parents screaming at their kids to blow while holding their noses. Adult behind us slapping his thighs shouting endlessly, "Oh no. Oh no." But we got an $8 voucher for lunch at the airport while we waited for a new plane. I had a terrible migraine on a flight back in 2014. Nothing would give me relief on this 9-hour flight. Really bad ear infection. I was crying during the plane's ascent and descent because of how much they hurt. My dad and brother were both comforting me throughout, so it wasn't all bad. Had Subway for lunch. Food poisoning kicked in just as we were about to take off. Flight was from Christchurch, New Zealand to Dubai, plus 1 0-hour flight. Threw up for the whole duration of the flight. I sincerely apologize to the 2 kind French ladies who had to tolerate me spewing vomit for the whole flight. Hope you're doing well out there. Oh, and the 2-day layover in Dubai was absolute hell. Probably a Ryanair flight. 15 minutes from landing was sitting near the wing. Overhear someone sitting near the other wing saying, "That smoke is pretty thick." Everyone starts panicking by acting calm even though on the inside people's hearts were beating. Kids and drunks. One time I flew with a really bad hangover and I had to use the toilet really bad. Out of sympathy and respect for everybody on that plane, I held out, and once we landed I ran to the bathroom like Usain Bolt. Another time, which was super scary. I could feel the blood in my body rushing up for several seconds. Especially in my feet. This was during a rather bumpy flight and it still haunts me. Got moved to a smaller plane. Hit scary turbulence. Men were standing up. The calmest person was an Amish woman reading or sewing. This was when I was 10 to 11 years old. Went on a 9-hour flight and had the middle seat. An older woman sat in the window seat and had a horrendous smelling perfume on. The kind that gives you a headache in the first 10 minutes. She went to the restroom and reapplied her perfume every couple of hours. The smell plus turbulence was enough for me to throw up for the duration of the flight. For years after, I was so scarred that I took motion sickness pills every flight. Only to realize I didn't have motion sickness. It was just that old woman's horrible perfume. Flying Amsterdam, Düsseldorf when KLM used to fly the small Fokker 50s during a very windy late November afternoon. The landing was hands down the worst I've ever experienced. Light aircraft. Scheib fork. Engine failure after takeoff. No altitude to turn around. Crash landing on a plowed field and flipped. The pilot and I made it out without a scratch. An 8-hour flight with a child who I'd guess was around 8 years old and autistic. Obviously not the child or the parents' fault. And the flight was probably hardest on them. 8 hours of running up and down the aisles. Climbing on seats and shrieking at full volume. Nothing would settle him. He must have found being on the plane a sensory overload nightmare. I don't remember anyone getting outwardly annoyed. Though, that would make you an asshole. Right? About to board a flight back home. Reading these comments is giving me anxiety. You guys have gone through things I didn't think were possible. Skull. Baby. Tried to pee into the bathroom toilet. Insane turbulence hit and pee was going everywhere in the bathroom. I sat next to someone who had a phobia of flying. They spent the flight in terror and described to me everything that could go wrong with the plan. And what would happen to us if it did. By the time I got off the flight, I was a nervous flyer. Fear can be contagious. I have sinus issues and when landing they get way worse. One time I thought that my sinuses would explode. I have never felt so much pain. I almost passed out. Flying into SFO once and we hit wake turbulence. Normal turbulence just feels like small little potholes in the air. but wake turbulence is side-to-side turbulence caused by disturbed air from a plane in front. I truly thought the plane was going to flip over and crash as we were landing. I've flown a lot, so not much scares me when flying. But I still vividly remember that.